Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got a fantastic guest for you today, TJ van Gerven. And he is a CFP and bread and butter guest. He's going to talk to us all about FIRE for millennials, financial planning, retirement planning, very specific niche such as married couples. And I'm really excited to have him on the show and get started. So, TJ, welcome.
Thank you for having me on, Christopher. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, so I know you talk about what you do, who you are, how you got there, and
Sure.
briefly how the audience can benefit from your expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that. So I graduated college in 2015, so a pretty quick turnaround. I've always been really into personal finance and investing, but actually more so investing, but I learned a lot more about the personal finance space as I was getting towards graduating, and I was thinking, what career can I get into? And so I got matched up with a like a resident program with financial planner, and so kind of got my foot in the door and just really went at it hard right out of college. Got my Series 7, 66 insurance license, CFP,
Oh, shit.
and just really banged it out as fast as possible. And was always kind of a little bit entrepreneurial mindset. I wanted to create my own practice. And so basically, as soon as I got the experience requirement for the CFP, when I moved back to Massachusetts around 2018, decided to take the leap and just start my own planning practice using XY Planning Network. Gave me the resources there, and kind of just wanted to build a planning practice for what I would want for myself, just kind of as a millennial who the most of the industry is geared towards like the baby boomers and the retirees and kind of managing assets. And I wanted to kind of create a comprehensive practice that really focuses on someone's entire net worth and just figuring out like what's the best way to optimize your resources and then ultimately figure out like what you want to do with it. And so it's been a learning process. I started my practice in 2018 and just really have been iterating since to create kind of the ideal the demographic I want to serve, figuring that out, the service calendar, all those kind of things. So it's certainly been a long process, but I'm hoping that I can provide value to your audience. I definitely am just a fan of financial literacy in general and happy to share whatever knowledge I can for what I've seen. And I always say, even if I can't work with somebody, I hope that they can receive value.
Yeah, and I love that. And so, we'll start off by talking about the retirement crisis and really the amount of just basically there's a disconnect between what we're learning and the job market and the economy and actual results. And you see a lot of people struggling. I think there was a statistics, 60% of people can't come up with $1,000, so talk about retirement crisis and where you fit in.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is part of the reason I did want to work with the younger demographic is the unfortunate, I would say, reality is if you are let's say approaching 60 and you haven't necessarily saved or anything or putting away any kind of investments, it's very hard to catch up. So I like to work with people earlier on in their career when they still have time to kind of build good habits and implement strategies that have compounding effects over their lifetime, understanding being efficient with tax planning, understanding an investment strategy. So it's great to get started earlier because there's compounding effects over your lifetime. And so, yeah, it is unfortunate that obviously there is a growing wealth disparity for a lot of different reasons. But basically, you have to figure out a way to live below your means and start owning assets that can at least keep up with inflation. It is unfortunate that most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck and they're
Mm.
stuck in this kind of wage earning cycle where they're not able to then retain anything.
Yeah.
And so basically, the sooner that you can learn just how to at least start owning some kind of assets whether it's the stock market, real estate, something, and then just starting to think about what can you build for the future, then you're going to put yourself in a position to be successful. So I don't know how it's going to shake out with obviously retirement crisis and things like that. I know a lot of baby boomers are going to have issues over their retirement, but
Mm.
hopefully, from what I've seen, I think millennials and Gen Z are a little bit more aware, and I don't blame baby boomers. They didn't necessarily have, again, the access to resources for financial literacy. A lot of this stuff is new. I mean, just like accounts like a Roth IRA is kind of a relatively new thing. The whole concept of retirement is actually a very new concept in the history of humans. So I think that future generations are going to be more, have more foresight to plan ahead. And
Mm.
also with the elimination of less fixed income like pension sources, and now it's on the individual to really invest their own money and create an income stream there, that
Yeah.
you kind of have to take it on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because, like my grandparents' generation, they grew up during the wartime and like they were always talking about social security, government, that's the thing, that's, government. And then my parents were like or pensions, work for a great company and get a pension. And then it became job security, and then it was like 401k, and now all those have evaporated. It's like now it forces everybody to be entrepreneurs and investors and kind of disassociate with just this kind of like one mantra path.
Yes,
Yeah,
definitely.
yeah, which brings me to this next question is because a lot of individuals are now starting to do kind of like these what's called like sabbaticals or mini retirements of the FIRE movement. Kind of share your thoughts on its principles. I know the boomers are like, yeah, the FIRE movement, yeah, it's a bunch of losers, kind of talk, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I understand it gets a bad rap for the idea of like, hey, like you're 30 years old and you're not going to work ever again. Maybe if you've experienced a windfall. And
Yeah,
I think people that do experience the ability to have some kind of fire lifestyle, they do change their mindset over time, and that maybe it's more of like a work optional thing. It's
yeah,
about like, spending your time doing something that you enjoy, but you're still able to earn some level of income. I'm just a fan of work optional in general in the sense that you actually use your money. You talked about it, how maybe, previous generations would work the same job for 30 years and then have this arbitrary point in time where they stop and then they don't work. Whereas I think millennials, Gen Z, they're more of the mindset that they want to still live for today because they've seen kind of how much maybe their parents have given up, over their lifetime, and they don't want to necessarily repeat that. And so I'm a big fan of just actually using your money. So I encourage, obviously you want to be responsible, but the more that you do financially plan and that you do have an understanding of your complete balance sheet, you can actually use your money more effectively. And I call it financial flexibility. So I'm a big fan of, taking breaks along the way. You mentioned as well, like people are changing jobs a lot more frequently just because that's the best way to increase their income. And so if you've accumulated some resources along the way, I'm a big fan of encouraging you to actually use them and enjoy your life.
yeah. I love this idea of flexibility. And there was I think the book that kind of started it all was the Tim Ferriss, that 4 hour work week, where he is talking about just and it's interesting because we never know when we're gonna die. Taxes are the government's gonna take part of it. There's inflation, and we never know. Like we could basically work our entire lives, save and invest, and then some CEO or some market crash, takes away everything, and then I mean, we're like 50 years doing nothing. So it's important to like live for today, but save for tomorrow as well. So.
A
Uh,
100%. You mentioned that another book that I recently read was Die with Zero. I don't know if you've heard of that one, but that's another good concept as far as like, really thinking about when you get the most use out of your money over your lifetime, because a lot of
yeah,
people will unfortunately spend their life savings to extend their life, end of life, when they really don't get much utility out of that, whereas they would have gotten much more utility in their 30s, taking that trip, going to that wedding, etc.
yeah, yeah. Um, the other, yeah, I love that book, Die with Zero, because that way when you die, the government can't, take it and just use it for wars and all these, these, frivolous spending. So,
Absolutely.
um,
Absolutely.
yeah. A question I get quite commonly is what is like definition of financial independence, retirement, financial freedom, kind of dispel these because it like kind of the definition changes, and what is, it sounds like financially independent is an important goal for a lot of millennials.
Yeah, I think this concept of financial independence, it comes from, I'm sure your audience is familiar, heard of like the 4% rule or 4% rule of thumb. This idea, if we look back historically at, stock market returns and bond market returns, it comes from like a 60-40 portfolio, which is kind of the traditional retiree portfolio. And if we look back historically, throughout the market environments that we've experienced, if you can keep your withdrawals to 4% of your investment assets, so let's say you have $1 million investment portfolio and you extract $40,000 a year, in theory, this was also looking at somebody, I think, age 60, who is less of a time horizon there for their life. But basically every market environment, every market crash, whether it was, 1987 or dot-com bubble or 2008, you were able to not run out of money. And
Yeah.
so basically this idea of financial independence is where you have enough liquid investments that can create an income stream that pays for your lifestyle, inflation adjusted. And so I think that's what financial independence is. There's different levels to it. I know people, there's like Coast Fire and, Lean Fire, all these different fire levels where maybe you can really reduce your, expenses and you can live off your investment assets. And I think that's where it gets a bad rap. But that would be my general definition, is if you have enough investment assets that with reasonable expectations around return assumptions, inflation, spending, et cetera, that you have a good chance of not running out of money.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I was talking to another guest the other day, and like, this 3%, 4% rule. So basically, we're talking is like you save or invest $1 million and then you take 3 or 4%. That's like 30 or $40,000 a year. With if you're living in San Francisco, that's that's almost, that's almost nothing, So
Right.
um, but the other question I get quite common for millennials is renting versus buying a home, and especially now we got tornadoes in Chicago, flooding in Houston, earthquakes. Home ownership's almost become a pain. But then you also say that you have to own assets that appreciate against the rate of inflation. So renting, buying it, and also it's getting really expensive. People are getting priced out. So how do you reconcile this with your clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's definitely a very big topic right now, especially given where interest rates have gotten to. And you're right, the affordability of home ownership is just continuing the unaffordability is continuing to increase. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are going to be priced out of the home market altogether. There's people that are just never going to own homes. What I would say is it really comes down to your time horizon. The longer you believe you're going to own that property, the better financially it becomes. Just as a general rule of thumb, if you have less than a 10-year holding period requirement, it's going to be difficult to really make it a good financial decision, especially given the current interest rate environment. I think a lot of people don't understand what an amortization schedule is on a mortgage. And so a lot of times I like to educate clients on, even if, they say like, oh, I'm throwing away money renting, right? And maybe I'm paying 3, 4, 5, 6,000 a month in rent if I'm in a major city. But when you actually look at a mortgage and amortization schedule, especially at 7% interest rate,
Right.
Basically in your first few years of your mortgage, like 75% of your mortgage payment is going towards interest, which may even exceed what you were paying in rent. And that's before you have property taxes, insurance, and then maintenance as well. And that's the huge one. And then also when you sell the property, you have to pay a transaction cost to your realtor. So when you really run the numbers on it, a lot of times it's actually a fairly suboptimal investment, especially when you compare it to like expected returns to the stock market.
Yeah.
And the thing that I also push back on is a lot of times people look at, oh, my parents bought their house for X amount, it's now worth X amount. First of all, a lot of people just don't understand compounding interest and kind of how time can really impact that value. But also they don't factor in all of the, again, maintenance, insurance, property taxes. I mean, a lot of times, depending on where you're buying, the property taxes alone can be a substantial amount of a rent payment. And I like to just remind people, even if you own your home, you're still kind of renting it from the government in a sense. Like you don't ever truly own it. Try not paying your property taxes. You're probably not going to hold on to your, property. So the way I look at it is it's really about lifestyle decisions. Are you going to be somewhere for a really long time frame? Do you want the ability to like customize it, things like that? From a financial standpoint, like the current environment, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me unless, again, you have a really long time horizon.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. It's like you said, it's always good to have options, and like you can be either no real estate, or you can own a condo. Just kind of it's kind of you can have exposure to that, but it's like it's not to the point where you're house poor, or you're just kind of you're stuck in one place, because a lot of people, like a lot of millennials now, they live in different parts of the world, and they're like so their concept of location is just very different.
And absolutely, and that's the thing. If you want flexibility to like actually enjoy your life, like you said, you probably don't want to have so much of your income going towards your primary residence, whether that's renting or buying, because you can enjoy yourself outside of your home. It depends on what you really value there.
Yeah. Next question is debt versus investing for millennials and Gen Z. And again, another startling statistic is like, for physicians, 500,000 K in debt when they come out. And, for others that, sometimes there's no jobs out there and you're 500K. And then, so getting into debt, paying down debt versus investing, what factors make the best choice?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is where it does get into some technical things here and also how comfortable you are with kind of opportunity cost decisions. I mean, obviously, there's different camps of thought here. If you're familiar with Dave Ramsey, it's like pay down all your debt, don't do anything else. I think it's important just to have awareness, right? So in the position of a physician, for example, they're going to have a really high income, so they're still going to have probably cash flow to do other things. So I
Yeah.
think, taking a balanced approach is good. It always starts with understanding the interest rate on your debt and then also the interest rate environment. So this can change over time, but for example, 1 to 3 month treasury bills currently pay above 5%. So it's like if you have a 5% interest rate and you're getting 5%, it's pretty close call there. I
Yeah.
would say once you start getting above like 6, 7, 8%, it typically makes sense to pay that down at an accelerated rate. When you think about long-term expectations for if you do have like a index fund type strategy, you might be looking at like 8% annualized, but that comes with risk. When you pay down debt, it's a guaranteed rate of return.
Yeah.
So if I can pay down debt at 8% at a guaranteed rate of return versus invest my capital with an unguaranteed 8%, it typically makes sense to do that. But other things to factor in are like tax consequences as well. Like, when you contribute to your 401k, maybe you are in that higher tax bracket. With traditional contributions, you're also going to get an income tax deduction, which is
Yeah.
going to add value as well. So I would say you just want to understand your cash flow, understand the interest rates of your debt, understand your available options. And then I would say usually a balanced approach makes the most sense. But these are conversations that can also be personal depending on how you feel.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And debt is how you use it. If you can use debt to make a down payment and then the house appreciates. There's a lot of different strategies. Another question, because you're a millennial Gen Z advisor, and here's the thing is like a lot of millennials, Gen Z, we talked about real estate, we talked about the stock market, of course, this dollar cost average, is kind of 60/40 is dead. But there's like now in order to catch up because of all the lost opportunity, a lot of millennials are like, the traditional methods don't work for me. So there's this new asset class. I don't know if they ask you, Bitcoin, digital assets, Ethereum.
Sure.
What are your thoughts? Again, not if advice, we're just, discussing.
Yeah, investment advice, but I would say I've definitely evolved my views on this over the years. I've been following Bitcoin since definitely like 2012, 2013, and I was very skeptical for a long time. I would say until the last couple of years, I do think it's a viable asset class.
Hmm.
However, I think it's important to separate Bitcoin from cryptocurrency. I think cryptocurrency at large
Yeah.
is mostly a Ponzi scheme, and a lot of these, coins are created. And then you have these things like rug pulls and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is the original. What makes it special? I mean, if you're familiar with the story behind it, with the Bitcoin white paper and Satoshi, it's important that it is a truly decentralized asset where nobody controls it and there is a finite supply of it. And so the idea is it does provide kind of like a storage of value in the sense that the supply cannot be manipulated. Now, the price is going to fluctuate. It's an extremely volatile asset.
Yeah.
And you definitely still want to practice good investing principles. Like you shouldn't be investing money that you can't afford to lose, things like that. But I do think it's a viable asset class. But definitely not a fan of cryptocurrency outside of that in general.
Yeah.
But I think it's still evolving, and I think that you should still focus on kind of that traditional asset classes first and build a strong foundation because again, I don't think most people understand the math behind compounding interest. People think that like an 8% annualized return is very low, but what they don't understand is that if you can compound that return over time and avoid uh, permanent loss of capital, right?
Uh-huh.
That's the key. You want to avoid losing, going to zero. If you can compound that over 10, 20, 30-year period, you can have a substantial amount of money, even with what you'd consider a lower rate of return.
Yeah. Yeah, there's safe, there's conservative, and then there's kind of more speculative, risky, of course, in again, this new asset class is kind of people are kind of looking at it as an alternative. It's just like gold, but again, it's very early and it's very volatile. And then what's interesting is like before it was like institutions were like no, but now you have BlackRock, and then they say 1%. Now I'm hearing 5%, and it's going to be kind of like this evolving, just like they said, the 60-40 portfolio. Really interesting. And I know because a lot of the audience are young doctors and they may need advice or just CFP that gets in kind of the millennial Gen Z mindset, married couples as well, just out of school. How can they reach you, check out your work, and so on?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. Modernwealthbuilders.com is my website. You can learn about everything there. I also have a podcast called Do More with Your Money,
Yeah.
which is also on the website. Everything you can learn about is there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And it was a really great conversation. I know a lot of CFPs are niching down into their specific cohorts, and sounds like you're focusing on millennials and Gen Z, and which is a great way, somebody that gets you. And thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.